After more than 2 years of economic turmoil, 2010 ended with glimmers of positive news for the economy. Holiday sales were up 5.5% over 2009, beating expectations. Stocks were also headed in the right direction. The Dow ended the year up 11%, the Nasdaq almost 17%. But the unemployment rate is stuck at 9.8%, only slightly better than it was at this time last year. This weekend, President Obama addressed the challenges ahead.
Even as we work to boost our economy in the short term, it's time to make some serious decisions about how to keep our economy strong. How will we attract the companies of tomorrow to set up shop and create jobs in our communities? What will it take to get those jobs?
Joining me now, the President's top economic advisor, Austan Goolsbee. Austan, thanks so much for being here and Happy New Year.
Thanks for having me, Jake.
So very quickly and concisely, where are the jobs?
Well, we've added 1.2 million private sector jobs thus far in the data for 2010. We got a long way to go. The president's the first one to say that. I think the coming out of the worst financial crisis of our lifetimes, it's always a messy, bumpy road to get out of that. But I think you saw in the weekly unemployment claims, they went to 388,000, the lowest level in years. You're starting to see encouraging signs, I'd say, and so we just got to juice this and pump it up and get it going faster. But that's clearly the direction that we're headed.
And how do you juice it and pump it up? What is the president's plan for meaningful GDP growth and for new jobs?
Well, yeah, I think it's putting in place a lot of in the tax deal. You got direct incentives for companies to invest in the country. You got a payroll tax cut for workers that follows up on the small business bill to get credit to small businesses, and he's now cut taxes 17 times for small businesses in the country. I think the focus has got to be on investment, on exports, and on innovation, and that's rather than on excessive consumption and housing investment as it was in the last boom. And I think the president's firmly planted in that camp, and we're going to grow our way out of this.
And so in terms of exports, those 3 trade deals that are just sitting there, are those going to become more of a priority than they were in 2010?
Well, look, the president said at the State of the Union last year that he wanted to get those deals done, and we go through a period, and the first version of the South Korea trade agreement was not sufficiently good for the United States, so the president wouldn't sign on to that. But now we negotiated really a path-breaking trade agreement that is fundamentally different. It addresses non-tariff barriers to U.S. exports in a way that other agreements have not. And so I think you see the president right out of the gate, he has been supporting that agreement, and you'll see that go forward. And then he's absolutely supports the other agreements.
Looking at the year, last year, in the supplemental volume of the president's budget, the White House estimated the annual average rate of unemployment for 2011 would be 9%. Does the White House stand by that number? Will the average rate of unemployment this year be 9%?
Well, we released the forecast, and I'm impressed you're reading the supplemental materials from the budget last year, Jake.
Well, a little night reading.
We issue that forecast every 6 months, and we'll be coming out with one very soon to update that. But if you look at the private sector forecasters, they're all in that same kind of a range.
But that would suggest if the unemployment rate is now 9.8%, it would go down almost a full point average for this year. And you think that's going to happen?
Well, as I say, if you look at, we issue the official forecast every 6 months, and it has not yet come out for this year. But if you look at the private sector forecasters, they are anticipating, and the recent data has been pretty positive, that we get continued recovery. We added 1.2 million private sector jobs last year. We're still waiting for one more month of data for 2010. And 2011, we're every bit on the path to start generating jobs. We have to. I mean, the president's been saying that repeatedly.
There's a big crisis point coming up potentially, and that is the nation is only about $400 billion away right now from reaching the $14.3 trillion debt ceiling, meaning this spring Congress will have to vote on whether or not to lift that ceiling. A number of Republicans, especially Tea Party candidates, have said that they will not vote to do so. What economic effects would people see immediately if Congress does not raise the debt ceiling? And does the administration have a contingency plan if that happens?
Well, look, it pains me that we would even be talking about this. This is not a game. You know, the debt ceiling is not something to toy with. That's the if we hit the debt ceiling, that's essentially defaulting on our obligations, which is totally unprecedented in American history. The impact on the economy would be catastrophic. I mean, that would be a worse financial and economic crisis than anything we saw in 2008. As I say, that's not a game. I don't see why anybody's talking about playing chicken with the debt ceiling. If we get to the point where you've damaged the full faith and credit of the United States, that would be the first default in history caused purely by insanity. I mean, there would be no reason for us to default other than that would be some kind of game. I mean, I hope we don't. We shouldn't even be discussing that. People will get the wrong idea. The United States is not in danger of default. We do not have problems such as that. This will be lumping us in with a series of countries through history that I don't think we would want to be lumped in with.
Well, some Republicans are talking about making an issue out of the debt ceiling to force the administration and the Congress to cut spending. President Obama himself has talked about the need to tackle the debt and the deficit and the need to cut spending. Where specifically does President Obama want to cut spending? Where is there fat to cut from the budget?
Well, you know, as you know, the president's going to release his budget. We are going to have to make, in the medium run, a series of tough choices, and the president's not afraid to do that. And I think you will see in his budget
give me one spending cut that he's willing to make.
Well, last year you saw they put out $20+ billion of terminations and reductions suggested. The president obviously doesn't just get to dictate what those cuts would be, but you saw with the Joint Strike Fighter and the second engine and a series of other specific cuts. I mean, there were $20+ billion in there.
Republicans, the House Republican leadership that's going to take office this week, they've outlined some specific cuts. I want to get your reaction to them. One, cut government spending to pre-stimulus, pre-bailout levels. That could save, they say, at least $100 billion in the first year. Cancel unspent stimulus funds, establish a hard cap on new discretionary spending, and impose a net federal hiring freeze on non-security employees. Do any of those strike you as unreasonable? Could President Obama get behind any of them? Let's talk about returning spending to 1998 levels.
Well, look, here's what I'll say, but it is obviously I'm not a legislative strategist. The president in the weekly address laid out his approach, which is any good ideas to get the economy growing, we're open to that, from either party, from business, from labor, from wherever. And we should be able to work together. And you saw in the tax deal, I think, whether it's incentives for investment, tax cuts for workers and small businesses, if it's investing in education, investing in innovation, I think there's a good common ground a lot of people can unite around to get the economy growing. Trying to return us to either in the regulatory sphere or other spheres, let's try to go back to the conditions that existed that got us into the mess that we have been getting out of for the last 2 years, I think is a bad idea. If you're going to go skimp on important investments that we need to grow, you're making a mistake. The reason the deficit is big this year is because we're coming out of the worst recession since 1929. That's the reason. The longer run fiscal challenge facing the country is important. The president is the one who set up the fiscal commission that laid out various strategies to deal with that. The president has for years said we've got to confront those issues. But that's totally different than saying, let's go tighten the belt in the midst of coming out of the worst recession since 1929. It's very important that we not conflate those two.
Very briefly, because we only have a minute left, I haven't yet heard you propose any new ideas for job growth. You talked about the tax compromise that passed last month. It's 2011. People want to hear from President Obama and his administration what ideas he has to juice the economy, as you said at the very beginning of this interview. How are you going to juice the economy?
Look, Jake, in the last several months, we've passed a small business bill. He's cut taxes now 17 times for small business. We're pursuing the small business credit to get credit to small businesses. One of the biggest investment incentive expansions for the private sector that we've had in decades. A substantial tax cut for the self-employed and for workers in this country. All of that stuff was passed and is just coming into place now. I think that forms the core, that with the research, innovation, and the other investments that the president has proposed. Let's do those things. And the underlying principle is that once you're out of crisis mode, what we need now is to help the private sector stand up and do it. It shouldn't be driven predominantly, and certainly not 100%, by the government. The sustainable job creation has got to come in the private sector, and I think we've taken a lot of actions that will help us do that.
All right, Austan Goolsbee, thanks so much for joining us.